But the news was just announced that WNBA TV ratings are down more than 50% since Caitlin Clark's injury. And it was also reported that the Indiana Fever television viewership is also down.
The WNBA has been hit with a brutal reality check. The league's ratings have taken a massive hit, while Caitlin Clark remains sidelined recovering from her injury. We are talking about a staggering 55% drop in viewership. The league is scrambling for answers because the numbers simply do not lie.
Now, I know a lot of us were expecting some sort of dip since Caitlin Clark has been out with injury, but I don't think all of us were expecting the entire viewership of the entire.
When you turn your back on the hand that feeds you, this is what can happen. Do you think the WNBA is finally realizing just how important Caitlin Clark is? Or will they continue treating this as nothing more than a coincidence despite these shocking numbers? If you enjoy this content, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, more than 83% of viewers still haven't subscribed. It's completely free and takes only a second, but it truly means a lot to us. So, have you subscribed already? Great. Thank you so much for your support. Now let's get back to the video.
Right here, you can see there were a ton of tickets. A ton of tickets. Now, or a ton of empty seats, tickets. A ton of empty seats, right up here, 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 right up.
Well. Who is suddenly worried about ratings? The WNBA, the same league that spent much of last season downplaying or overlooking Caitlin Clark's impact, is now staring at numbers that could make any executive nervous. It is almost poetic justice. Honestly, these ratings are far worse than anyone expected, so let's break them down. Without Clark, nationally televised games could see a 55% drop in viewership. That is not a small dip. That is a dramatic free fall. To put it into perspective, games featuring Clark averaged around 1.8 million viewers. Without her, that number has fallen to roughly 847,000. That is barely half the audience. Now, let's be fair. Some people will say, that's only because she's a popular player. But popularity is not the only factor here. This also points to the WNBA's failure to build lasting interest around more than one star. And whose fault is that? Certainly not Caitlin's.
Mishandled so many things with the WNBA last season, and specifically with Caitlin Clark and her fan base. And that's one thing when you start thinking about how many people stopped watching when Caitlin Clark got injured. A lot of people stopped watching because they are boycotting the WNBA. They don't want to give viewership to any other teams or any other players, whether they like other players on the team or not, because of how the media and the league itself has handled Caitlin Clark and how they have treated her fans. Caitlin Clark and Indiana Fever fans have been called.
Remember when Caitlin Clark supporters were constantly told by the league and media personalities that they needed to appreciate real basketball and support other players? Remember when those new fans were labeled as fake, with claims that they weren't watching Clark because of her incredible talent, but simply because she was white? Well, how is that argument looking now?
And this tweet from Christine Brennan really stuck out to me. She said one player gets injured and more than half the TV audience for the entire league disappears. Has any other athlete ever had that kind of impact on a sport? Golf without Tiger definitely dropped precipitously on occasion, but not like this. A truly remarkable sports story continues. Now, we've gone over the Caitlin Clark effect, and I've also been one who has compared Caitlin to the likes of Tiger Woods just purely on her impact that she's had on the WNBA. But this news is alarming for the league, and it's alarming for the league because this is such a crucial year for the WNBA. At the end of this season, the WNBA will go into CBA negotiations. If negotiations go well, then every single player in the WNBA has a much better chance of making so much more.
The irony is hard to ignore. The WNBA failed to capitalize on the enormous potential Caitlin Clark brought because so much effort went into minimizing her influence and acting as though the league could thrive without her. Instead of embracing the millions of new fans she attracted, they pushed many of them away. Rather than using her popularity to elevate other players, they created a strangely hostile dynamic where supporting Clark seemed to mean opposing everyone else. And now look where we are. The WNBA is seeing firsthand what can happen when a fan base is not properly nurtured, especially when Clark is sidelined by injury. These numbers are not just embarrassing. They are a warning that the league may be too stubborn to respond.
We've got a bigger sample size of the ratings without Caitlin Clark, and they're pretty bad. Well, I don't want to say the ratings are bad, but they're just down a lot, a whole lot. So we're going to look at that, and wow, I saw those numbers and was like, holy hell. Kathy Engelbert, WNBA commissioner, you got your ears on? I mean, what's the F around and find out? You're finding out. Rat cheer and ratting.
Let us look at what these ratings really mean. During Caitlin Clark's absence, viewership for the Indiana Fever has fallen by 53%. But here is the bigger problem. Fever games are not the only ones struggling. Across nationally televised games, the league is reportedly down 55%. That suggests Clark was not simply bringing attention to her own team. She was helping draw attention to the WNBA as a whole. Think about that for a moment. A huge portion of the league's audience disappeared when one player was sidelined with an injury. Has any athlete ever had that kind of immediate impact across an entire sport? Christine Brennan made an interesting comparison to golf and Tiger Woods. But even Woods' absence did not create such a dramatic decline so quickly. This is what happens when you fail to diversify your audience. The WNBA spent too much time trying to prove it did not need Clark instead of figuring out how to keep her supporters engaged with the rest of the league. Perhaps they were simply too proud to admit that this young star was bringing something unique to the sport that deserved to be recognized rather than minimized.
Name under the sun. They have been called out by players in the WNBA. The media has, I mean, you've seen it. We've talked about it here. You can't miss it on social media every single day. There's some media personality saying something bad about Caitlin Clark's fans, calling the fans names, saying that they are not there for basketball. They're just following Caitlin because she's white, or they're trying to push a certain agenda. Like, the narrative surrounding the biggest fan base to ever come to the WNBA have been actually insane. And then it goes as far as to the first game of the season, which was at Indiana against the Chicago Sky. Right after that game, they opened an investigation once again into the fans, where they found nothing, but the damage had already been done at that point. If some of these things happen just one time here and there, or there's one certain media personality who's just always saying these kind of things, then whatever. I feel like fans as a whole can be like, okay, whatever, this person is just a hater. But this is something that has happened over and over and over again, and over time it starts chipping away at how much you're going to actually care and want to support an organization if they can.
Continued to. Let us talk about the games played while Clark has been absent. Angel Reese's Liberty vs. Sky matchup attracted nearly 600,000 viewers. By pre-Clark WNBA standards, that is not terrible, but it is still nowhere close to what we were seeing when Clark was healthy. The broadcast production also clearly plays a role. Put simply, some WNBA broadcasts on NBA TV and Amazon Prime are not exactly outstanding. Fans were willing to tolerate those shortcomings when Clark was playing because the basketball itself was worth watching. Without her, that patience appears to be fading. Speaking of Angel Reese, we need to address the bigger issue. The media spent a great deal of time creating a rivalry between Clark and Reese and suggesting they were comparable in terms of drawing power. But the ratings tell a different story. Reese is undoubtedly a talented player, but her audience impact has not matched Clark's. That is not meant as an insult to Reese. It is simply what the numbers appear to show. It has also been interesting to watch how the Fever have handled Clark's injury. Coach Stephanie White is right to be cautious and prioritize her players' health. Clark has been sidelined with injury, and the team has every reason to focus on her long-term recovery rather than rushing her back for short-term attention. Still, you can imagine that every day she remains unavailable creates pressure for the league office. Clark's absence has exposed just how limited the WNBA's star power can be. It is difficult to build a sustainable business model when one player's absence is followed by such a dramatic audience decline. The league is learning an expensive lesson about relying heavily on one superstar while simultaneously acting as though that superstar's importance does not matter. Instead, officials should be studying how to develop and promote more players who can connect with fans. For the WNBA, the timing of this ratings decline could hardly be worse. These numbers could become important during CBA discussions at the end of the season. League revenue affects players' salaries, benefits, and working conditions. If one player's injury is associated with a major decline in viewership and revenue, the financial consequences can reach everyone. It is also worth remembering that Clark's injury came just as the league appeared to be gaining serious momentum. Early season attendance and viewership numbers were drawing major attention. Corporate sponsors were watching closely. It looked like the WNBA had reached a major turning point. Then Clark got hurt, and suddenly the reality became impossible to ignore. What makes this frustrating is that some of this could have been avoided. The WNBA might be in a much stronger position today if it had spent the past year turning Clark's new supporters into fans of the entire league instead of lecturing them about what real basketball fandom should look like. Rather than creating a zero-sum environment where supporting Clark seemed to mean diminishing everyone else, the league could have used her popularity to introduce those fans to other stars. Instead, we saw endless debates about whether Clark supporters were problematic, whether they understood basketball, and whether their interest was driven by reasons unrelated to her talent. Some players and media figures also made dismissive comments about Clark and her attention from fans. Before Clark arrived, there were plenty of voices insisting that the WNBA already had everything it needed. Well, congratulations then. Your wish came true. You are now seeing exactly what the WNBA looks like without Clark. It looks a lot like the WNBA from years ago, when players were making far less money and hardly anyone was paying attention. The Sophie Cunningham situation makes things even more complicated. With Cunningham also dealing with her own physical issues, the Indiana Fever have essentially been without several of their key players. Although Cunningham appears ready to return, the team is still being careful with her. It is the right decision for her health, but it also means the ratings continue to struggle. The way the league is handling the situation is incredibly revealing. There has been no major acknowledgement of the ratings decline and no obvious strategy for keeping fans engaged while Clark remains sidelined. It is simply business as usual, and that may be exactly the wrong approach. This is a problem that needs to be addressed now rather than ignored. It is also important to discuss the quality of the broadcasts. Fans were willing to tolerate weaker production when Clark was playing because the action itself was compelling enough to keep them watching. Without her, those production issues become much harder to overlook. When the main attraction is missing, fans accustomed to NFL and NBA production standards are less likely to stick around for a broadcast that feels below that level. This is where the WNBA's lack of investment in its overall product becomes especially obvious. The league has spent so much time trying to survive that it has not always invested enough into making every broadcast feel like must-see television. The commentary can sometimes feel underwhelming. Compared with other major professional sports, the production can appear less polished, and the camera work can be inconsistent. A perfect example was the Atlanta Dream versus Fever game without Clark. Fans may tolerate a rough broadcast when they are tuning in to watch Clark create something special, but they are much less likely to tolerate the same production when the biggest stars are missing. That is simply the reality of sports entertainment. And when you look at Clark's numbers before her injury, it becomes obvious why so many people were watching. She was averaging around 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 9.3 assists per game. This season, she had already recorded a triple-double. She was playing spectacular basketball while performing at an elite level. The assist numbers are especially important because she was making the players around her better, which is exactly what great athletes are supposed to do. But Clark brings something to the court that cannot be completely captured by statistics. She has that rare quality that makes casual fans stop and watch. Her plays end up on highlight reels. She creates moments that people talk about the next day. The WNBA is learning this lesson the hard way because very few athletes in any sport possess that kind of ability to generate attention. Before her injury, Clark had also played an extraordinary number of consecutive games dating back to college and her first WNBA season, showing just how durable she normally is. This is not someone who takes missing games lightly. The team has every reason to be cautious because when she is injured, protecting her health has to come first. When you look at the bigger picture, the Fever's record without their star can still be considered respectable. But from a business perspective, Wins and losses mean much less when fewer people are watching. The WNBA is ultimately an entertainment product, and right now the league is discovering just how difficult it can be to maintain that entertainment value without one of its biggest attractions. When Clark eventually returns, it will be fascinating to see how the league responds. Will they finally recognize that she is one of their biggest assets and start treating her accordingly, or will they continue with their previous strategy of trying to downplay her influence? If you ask me, the smart money says they will probably do both. They may publicly minimize her importance while quietly doing everything possible to keep her healthy and competitive. But that kind of contradiction cannot last forever. One of the biggest opportunities for Clark's comeback would have been a matchup against the Liberty. A nationally televised battle between Clark and Sabrina Ionescu would have been incredible television, especially with the Liberty playing some of the best basketball in the league. Instead, many casual fans may simply skip a lower-rated game. The entire situation is a lesson in how badly you can mishandle your most valuable asset. When Clark entered the WNBA, the league suddenly had everything it could have wanted. But instead of taking full advantage of that momentum, they spent too much time trying to convince everyone that her impact was not as significant as it appeared. Now they are left wondering where all that energy went. The lesson could not be simpler. When a generational talent brings unprecedented attention to your league, you embrace it. You do not fight against it. You do not try to make it smaller. And you certainly do not alienate the fans who arrive because of that player. The WNBA failed to capitalize on that opportunity, and now they are dealing with the consequences. These numbers have to make Commissioner Kathy Engelbert wonder how things changed so quickly. At one moment, the league was celebrating record attendance and massive viewership. The next, it was watching those numbers fall dramatically without Clark. That is what can happen when you are unwilling to acknowledge how heavily your business has become connected to one superstar. The frustrating part is that much of this could have been prevented. If the WNBA had spent the past year building up other players alongside Clark instead of constantly trying to diminish her, the league could be in a much stronger position today. Instead of criticizing new fans, they should have welcomed them. If they had invested more aggressively in marketing, promotion, and broadcast quality, they might not be facing this situation now. But they did not, and now they are discovering what happens when you take your audience for granted. The moment your biggest star gets injured, a huge portion of that audience can disappear. That is not a sustainable business strategy, and it certainly is not a reliable formula for long-term growth. The WNBA is now at a crossroads. Either they accept reality and make the changes necessary to build a sustainable league around their biggest stars, or they continue pretending that Clark's influence is not as powerful as the numbers suggest, that this ratings decline is simply a temporary anomaly, and that everything will magically return to normal when she comes back. Based on the league's past approach, I am not particularly confident about which direction they will choose. But these ratings will be difficult to ignore because the numbers are telling a very clear story. And that is the bottom line. The WNBA has received a brutal reality check. When you spend a year alienating fans who came because of your biggest star, do not be surprised when many of them stop watching when that star is no longer on the court. No amount of public relations spin can overpower what the numbers are showing. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update. I will see you in the next video, so make sure to check out the video on your screen.